Welcome to another episode of Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindi Baldy, and this is my husband and co-host, Jeffrey Tumlin.
Yellow! Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to the Management Muse. This is part 2 of our discussion on resiliency. If you haven't listened to part 1, we covered what resiliency is, why it's so important today, and a handful of tools to help you be more resilient before and during adversity. In today's episode, we will focus on tools to help you spring back after adversity has struck. Thanks much for listening.
After the adversity has gone, some of the things that you can do possibly to try to
prevent it
from coming.
From being trauma.
Yes. From just even getting locked into it.
What do you mean by locked in?
Where like it keeps repeating on you.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know.
You're trapped by it. Mm-hmm. And it becomes defining. Yeah. Okay.
Right. And so the first one is this idea of cooling emotions. And so, you don't actually, the funny thing about her, I mean, I say funny, but I don't mean that it's funny.
Funny, not ha-ha.
Yeah, funny not
like,
ha-ha.
This ain't funny like, head scratch.
It's like, I can ask people, and I have in classes, because I used to teach. And so I could ask.
You still teach?
Well, that's true. I do, but just not at a university.
Homework.
Yeah, no homework.
No homework.
And so.
No grading, no homework.
Yeah, the no grading is fantastic. But so I would sometimes talk about fairness because it's a management class, and part of being a manager is trying to create a structure that people perceive as fair. And so sometimes I'd ask people to like recall moments where they felt like they weren't treated fairly, and even in the after effect, like everything would change about them. You could see the anger, you could like their faces would swell.
Mad again.
And this would be like years later.
Sure.
And
right.
So like you would call, so it's a big event that happened to them. It's this adversity, and even after the fact, when it hits, when they remember it, it still triggers these emotions. And so, when you have adversity, one of the things to do is to actually take the time to label your emotions, because we're not really very good at that. Like, we know we're experiencing something and we don't like it, but it's like a hodgepodge of all these emotions. And then when you start labeling it, you start unraveling.
Yeah.
And sometimes it even surprises you, because you're like, you know what? I'm actually not mad. I just don't feel safe.
Yeah.
And or that's just an example.
I'm not mad, I'm frustrated.
Yeah, I'm
not
right.
mad, I'm tired.
Right.
Or whatever. Yeah.
Right. There's actually something else under there, but you first experience it as this other emotion, or that there might be multiple emotions back there. And so by labeling it, then it automatically seems to cool it down a bit. And so there's a story from my past where I used to be a major part of the third largest motorcycle rally in the nation. And
true story.
In doing that, I had to make sure that we were upholding all our obligations to the city, including making sure that there was clear access for the fire department to get where they needed to go in the event of an emergency. And these agencies would come around and make sure that we were in compliance. And if we weren't, there was the risk that the whole venue would be shut down. So I'm walking around the venue, and I come up to a sawhorse that is there so the emergency services can just quickly move it out of the way and get onto the midway where the people are coming from the parking lot. But it's blocked off for pedestrians and to walk through. So it's a pedestrian walk, but it has a sawhorse, so we're preventing cars from driving onto the midway, except in the case of an emergency service. And I'm walking, and I see this spot, and there are 2 giant Harley Davidsons parked right in it. So there's no way that the fire department is getting through. And my immediate response is mad And I go over and I'm going to move these things. And then I'm like, oh, they're labeled, and they're labeled as belonging to members of, let's just say, Sons of Anarchy. We dealt with a lot of motorcycle clubs who were similar to Sons of Anarchy. And so we're just going to say that these two bikes belong to a particular group, and they have like these plaques on them that say that they belong. You do not want to move a motorcycle that belongs to a member of the Sons of Anarchy or any of their ilk. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to get these things moved. What am I going to do? And so I go over to one of the vendors attached to this particular group, and it's a guy who's a prospect, which is a guy who doesn't have full membership. And you can tell by the patchwork. He doesn't have full membership, so he's still like on a trial basis. And I'm like, look, I said, I explained the problem to him. Like, I just don't want all of us closed down because everybody wants to make some money this weekend. And yet, like, I need these things moved. Can you move them to someplace safe so nothing happens to them and they get out of the way? And so, he was so nice, and he did it. He moved them behind his tent so they were protected. And then I go about my way, and I'm basically doing a circuit. And by the time I come back to this particular location, I see the poor guy who went out of his way to help me, and he is getting reamed by a full member, and obviously one of the owners of one of the motorcycles. And so, like, I'm standing there, and I'm like, I can't let this guy take the beating. And like, because he really went out of his way to help me, and like, it's kind of important to him because technically they can still cut bait with him. So the guy the full member, he's like yelling at him and pointing at him, and I walk up and I go, "Sir, I'm the one who asked him to move the motorcycle," and the guy is just like he's like midway, and he's like shocked because I'm 105 pounds and 5'6". This guy is huge. He's got this bullwhip around his head.
Of course he does.
And he's super angry, and I'm coming up and I'm like, "Sir, I'm the one who's responsible for your bikes getting moved." And he's like, he freezes for a second.
Yeah.
And in the freezing, he's able to, it's similar to like the labeling, he's able to lose momentum.
Yeah.
Right. And once he loses momentum, like, the emotion cools.
Yeah.
And then he's just like, also, I mean, there's probably also a little bit of humor in it because, like, it's ludicrous that I'm coming up to this man and I'm like, "Sir, it's my fault."
Right.
And so he once he unfreezes, he's like, "Who are you?" Like, he goes from yelling to, "Who are you?" And I'm like, "I'm Cindi in the office." I'm the person who's kind of managing the whole midway, and and this is why he did what he did. And so it's just an example of how labeling and sort of taking a step back when you're experiencing the hot emotion can be ways that you then are able to handle the situation and like let go of the adversity.
Yeah. It makes sense. It's a good reminder and a good example. And I think it's important. We talk a lot about tools for managers throughout all these episodes. And it strikes me that this one of, as you said, as you were describing the story, people feel things all the time, but we're not exactly sure what we're feeling. And sometimes the manager's job is just to help people ID, what am I actually feeling? And get the right label on it. Not even the deeper Dr. Phil stuff of why am I feeling this, but like, what is it that I'm actually feeling? And then, is my response coming in too hot?
And I think they also have to, like, a key piece of of leadership is this idea of emotional IQ. And so it's not, you're right, it's not just the managers managing their emotion, which is important.
Yeah.
It's also managing other people's emotions.
Yeah.
And so, and many of these tools are not only good for you, they're good for you helping other people.
Yeah. Yeah. And this cool, we debated where we were going to put this, if it goes in the during or in the after.
It could go either.
Both, but we put it in the after because part of what creates trauma is that you don't get the emotions right after the incident is passed.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, a very simple way of thinking about PTSD is of any kind is that I'm still experiencing, like you think about your mom having PTSD from the wreck, that she's still experiencing the emotions of being in a car and hitting a wall, even though she's in a hospital room, not in a car. And so the emotion isn't dialed in right. A veteran returning from Afghanistan feels that there is a danger and is hypervigilant and is overly aggressive to jolts in the environment, even though the environment has changed. The emotions are not matching the right environment. And so that's why we put this cooling of emotion, which obviously can be helpful during an incident. It's why we put it in the after, because we're trying to the extent possible to not wish away bad things that happen to us, not pretend like it happened to somebody else, or not give any goofy mind trick techniques. But we're trying to not relive those sharp emotions past the due date, past when the incident or the event has actually happened.
I just do want to add, because you mentioned the PTSD, that it goes kind of back to that breaking point. There are some things that you need more of an intervention on. And so we think this will help the average person kind of experiencing adversity that's, typical-ish in life. Mm-hmm. But there are some extreme environments that you come from where, it may take you a little bit more work and a little bit more help.
Yeah, sure. You have to gather in your support, that you need different kinds of help. Mm-hmm. I need self-help, and then I need other help in my network, and then sometimes I need help beyond that.
Right. I just want to be clear that we're not advocating not seeking help when you've been through something that has literally given you PTSD. So these are helpful. Yeah. And they are extreme situations because it's adversity, and hopefully your life isn't constructed of total adversity. Mm. But there are some things that are so extreme and the breaking point. And so And it doesn't matter I think you're right that some things are so extreme that you need more than your self-help and local help. So to speak, local meaning your local network, your significant others, your close friends, your close family. You need beyond that. You need professionals. And there are, tons of people. We refer people out all the time. Not all the time, but every so often we refer people out because what they need isn't the kind of coaching that we provide as executive coaches. They actually need therapy or they need an EMDR intervention. But yes, some things are so big that they're going to require professional help. Mercifully, that's not what most of us experience. And we're just trying to help you.
Yep.
Handle.
With the normal.
Yeah.
With things that aren't extreme, but I would say also sometimes things just add up. And you're over the edge.
True.
And so it can be a lot of non-headline things that just add up and you're like, that's it. And in those cases, you may need help as well. Mm-hmm. But for a lot of the things that we experience, I think your point's good. We want people to get the help they need and to, when in doubt, seek more support than you may need. That being said, there's a lot of things that
we can do as individuals or we can do for other people.
Yep. Yeah, that as individuals we can do for ourselves. As managers, we can do for the people we manage some things. And it is just parts of our own networks working home. Mm-hmm. We can be mutually reinforcing. Okay.
Hello, Musers. Now it's time for commercial break. Today I want to tell you about our 360 product. It includes both a 360, which is a report that analyzes people above, same level, and below you, and how they think of you in terms of key leadership skills.
And we take that report and we offer you some coaching along the way, help you identify where you want to improve, and then measure it at the end of a year to see how far you've come.
Yeah. Yeah, people love it.
And if you're interested in this product and helping develop your people, either call us or send us an email at culture.com. And culture is spelled CULSURE.com. Next one.
R.
That's reflect.
Yeah. You're going to tell the story about the university president. True story.
Yeah, this man is a poet.
A poet. A famous poem.
Yeah, famous.
If we told you, you would know it.
Yeah, you would be shocked. You'd be shocked that he's still alive because it's so famous. It feels like it's been around forever.
Yep.
And it's a very gentle poem.
Yeah, very gentle.
And so anyway, he was a university president at a university in Hawaii. And he put together a plan, they were having some struggles, and he put together a plan, and he started executing the plan. And a year in, they fired him because this gentle poet was too aggressive.
True story.
And so...
True story. Right, and he was basically doing nothing except what he was hired to do.
And so that's exactly what he said when we were talking to him after the fact. Not embarrassed by it at all. Totally had a candid conversation with us about it.
We're like, ooh?
Yeah, we're like, that's nuts that you got fired.
Crazy. He's like, yeah, they thought I was too aggressive.
Yeah. And so, he picked up, he found another great job, and he's on his way. And it's this idea that, when he reflects back, because this was part of the conversation, when he reflects back, there might have been a couple of things he might have changed, but really not much, because he was hired to do this job, and then he went and started doing the job. And so, it's in terms of him, it's a lesson in terms of, making sure that everybody's expectations are on the same page, probably, but when he reflects back, there's no regrets.
There's nothing to learn. Sometimes there's nothing to learn from adversity. Most of the time, there's often something, I would say, but sometimes there's not.
Right. There's just not much there.
Yeah. And you can't keep playing it over and over again. Mm-hmm. This is going to make you nuts. That's rumination. Drive you crazy. Mm-hmm. And I think I feel the same way Cindi does. He told us the story, and he's just completely honest about it. No embarrassment. And he's like, yeah, I look back, I thought about it, I spent some time reflecting and thinking, and
I'm good with everything I did.
Yep. I'm good, and I'm moving on. And he did. Within a few months after that, he had another amazing job.
And we can't always be that lucky. Sometimes we may look back and reflect and...
Yeah, usually there's something to learn.
Right.
Yeah. Usually there's absolutely something we could have done better. But once you've gone back and extracted that learning,
you move forward.
Yes. And that's, again, we're back to this tricky, what makes this topic tricky of deploying a resilient response is we do need to look back even on bad things and try to figure out, is there something to learn? Is there something I could have done differently? But once that's been done, that's it. There's nothing else there. And you have to try to catch yourself from going back. And I have that voice in my head, and I catch myself anytime I'm retreading ground from the past that I don't need to go over again. I've already thought through that. I've already got the lesson, and I'm guilty of ruminating. And I just put that voice in my head. Well, there he goes again, and I kind of laugh a little, and then that's my cue. I move on. Nate, you may remember from season 1, he did the episode on transitions. Really good guy. Anyway, we were there watching his presentation, and in his conclusion, the commanding general of the unit, who had brought Nate in to be a guest, and we were the guest of this guy, basically said to people, don't look back and think about the good old days. Create good days today. And that's, I think, a decent motto to try to keep us out of rumination. We're trying to have good days today. To do that, occasionally we need to go back and learn from our past, but once we have the learning, revisiting it is usually counterproductive. We've already done that, and we don't need to get back and continue to replay.
Right. All right. I think that wraps up Reflect.
Okay. And down to the last one for after adversity, to try to help prevent it from being trauma. The three, again, acronym time, we like CRM, if you can remember them. Cool the emotions, we talked about that. Reflect, not ruminate. And the last is try to find meaning. We're on a project. We've been on a project for a while. It's a company we really like. And really good people doing really good mission. They build health clinics and serve kind of underinsured and underserved parts of the community. And unusually for them, they bought a historic building and then we're going to convert it to a health clinic. And so it's like two different kinds of bureaucratic purgatory. There's the bureaucratic purgatory of doing something in healthcare and getting a building up to being a clinic. And then there's the purgatory of a historic building. And so those two were smashed together. And it was happening at a time when it was hard to get supplies. It was during, COVID, and the supply chains were disrupted. And so this project, the costs were ballooning. The timeline was just shifting out horrendously. And the guy holding the bag for the organization, the facilities director, is the nicest guy in the world. But I had been in meetings where he was getting it rough, and people were starting to tell me they were worried for the guy. And I'm, along with you, I'm one of the coaches, and I coach this guy. So I got worried. And so I basically reached out to him and said, look, I'm here for you. I think you may be going through something that's really tough, and I want you to know that I'm here if you need me. And he called and we talked, and basically he's like, look, you don't have to worry about me. He's like, I'm good. This clinic that we're building in this historic building, it's my hometown. And I've driven by this empty building for 5 years. And I've thought, if only somebody would do something with it. And then I rolled into work one day, and it's my company. And not only is it my company trying to do something with this building in my hometown, it's me. It's my job. And I'm going to pull this off, because when I do, I'll be the guy that took this great old building and made it serve the community again. And that's meaning. That's finding some kind of meaning in adversity. Whether that's this guy putting together this very difficult building, whether it's your mom trying to take a wreck, an accident, and catapult to the other side of that. I mean, let's do kind of a science roll-up now. Maybe this is a good way to kind of bring it together. Is we talked a little bit about the importance of trying to reframe the adversity as an opportunity for growth or development or advancement of some kind. Mm-hmm. We talked about that, how that kind of goes hand in hand with having a growth mindset. I can get better, I can improve, not I'm only this smart, I'm only this talented, I only have this much energy. Kind of related to that, in that growth mindset is Carol Dweck, somewhere on the West Coast. I forget exactly the school. I think she's West Coast. I think she's somewhere in California. That's related to some of the grit research by Angela Duckworth that people have probably heard about. And that also, a kind of third plank, is this idea of locus of control, which is, do we feel like stuff just happens to us, or do we feel like stuff happens but we get a response, we get to choose what we do? And that's external is I feel like stuff just happens to me. internal locus of control is I feel like although stuff happens, I get to choose my response. And in so doing, I get to shape the trajectory of what happens. And the science is pretty clear as it relates to resilience that trying to approach it with that internal locus of control of there's things I can do, there's ways I can kind of work myself out of this, tends to be the most likely to produce a resilient response to adversity.
Yes, I'd just like to add that if your tendency is more of, well, life will deal me whatever it will deal me, like kind of fate-based, which is all external, that doesn't mean that you can't intentionally be more internal.
Yeah.
And so when facing adversity, adversity, that I don't know, I've mushed together a bunch of adversity. When faced with adversity, we can decide that we're going to look for where we can make a difference. Tendency is not destiny.
But it is tendency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But hey, functional humans are compensating all the time.
Right. It just takes more effort.
Yep.
It's not how you're naturally inclined.
Yep.
So wrapping it up.
Homework, maybe?
So you want to give them the homework?
Yeah, we'll give them a little homework.
All right, give them the homework.
I would say the two things we talked about, Cindi and I talked about this a little bit. If you're only going to try to pull two things out of this to have a more resilient response, the first thing would be when you find yourself in adversity, try to quickly reframe and look for the opportunity. Don't exaggerate what you're in, but try to say, what's something that I might be able to learn from this? Or where's the opportunity for growth or development? And then the second thing is Cindi talked about cooling emotions and not exaggerating, not puffing up the actual problems we have. We've got problems. Let's not puff them up. Let's deal with them as they are. What's your strategy? What are you going to do? And that's the challenge if you listen to this podcast. In the moment, start looking for where's the growth opportunity, and then have in your hip pocket a cooling strategy so that our emotions don't dictate, they inform.
And I think you can practice both of those, even not like, I think you become stronger at being able to do both of those things if you practice them on a regular basis. Like you get better at labeling your own emotions.
Yeah, and provide that extra half a second to get thoughts in front of the emotions, not to negate the emotions.
No, you're having them, but sometimes when they're so hot that they take over and then there's no logic and all you have to do is cool them down a little bit. And then, because, emotions are, I think, undervalued, but they're telling you something's going on.
Yeah. And
they're the alert system, the alarm's going off. And so, you cool them down and then look around and be like, okay, so what is happening here? Like, why am I experiencing this? Wrapping it up.
Yeah. Let's talk about things to read. I think we really like that New York article was good by Anna, I think Karina is her name.
We'll have all that in the show notes. So like you can go there and get the actual bibliography.
Yeah.
And
I think that was called How to Be More Resilient. And then there's a Harvard Business Review article by Diane Couto, Couto, How Resilience Works. That was good. And then we had a book recommendation too.
Yes, The Body Knows the Score by Bessel van der Kolk.
Bessel van der Kolk. Yeah, The Body Knows the Score. Yeah, good book.
Very good book, especially on trauma and like the impact it has on the brain, and then some things you can do to help that. That's actually where I really learned about EMDR and was fascinated by it.
Yeah, and then probably the Martin Seligman.
Mm-hmm. Anything?
Optimism, would you say, or Authentic Happiness?
Probably learned optimism.
Could be.
Either one. Any Martin Seligman book is a good time.
Yeah.
Thanks again for joining us on the Management Muse. We appreciate likes, stars, downloads, shares, and subscriptions. For more information on the resources that help us generate this content, check out the reference material in our show notes. Special thanks to Rebecca Henley, Abby Ariano, and Ariel